All right, so shall we get started?
Sure, why don't you go ahead, Dave?
Yeah. All right, let me kind of kick things off for everybody. Of course, welcome back. Hope you all had a good summer, and we're glad to see you all here tonight. Thanks for taking time out this evening to be here. Want to kind of give everybody an update of what's been going on with this project and particularly the planning and environmental linkages process. I know there's still some folks trying to join in, but I want to kind of give just a little bit of an overview of what's been going on out there and some updates on the terminal before we get into our full agenda. One of the things I wanted to update folks on was the Issaquah vessel, which was out of service due to some mechanical issues earlier today, is performing sea trials right now. Things have been repaired. One of our requirements with the Coast Guard is to run some trials before we put it back into service. So we're hoping that it goes back into service here real soon. It's encouraging that it's out in the water at the moment and operating. So we'll let you know. As you all know, we have an aging ferry fleet, and we continue to have challenges with our fleet and on the maintenance side of things. I wanted to give us some updates on the maintenance barge that many of you have seen out at Fauntleroy. Two things are going on. You're all aware of the Cathlamet damage sustained in July. Part of the reason that the team is out there is to begin to do some temporary repairs and demolish portions of that. We call it the left outer dolphin, which is on the south side of the terminal. They're going to inspect that, take some parts of that down. We're going to try to salvage some of the piling that were not damaged. The piling that were used in that dolphin are not something we have on the shelf, so we're going to try to reuse some of that, but a lot of the structure is not repairable. We plan to be out there for about a week. They started really tackling that today, and then there'll be a need to come out at least a month, maybe 2 months from now, before we can bring out the new pile cap, which has to be repoured, and those new fabricated piling, and drive essentially a new dolphin and reassemble that. The other work that we're doing out there, I think folks saw the barge on the north side of the slip. There are just routine maintenance activities that we do at all the terminals around the sound. Periodically, we have a on-call contract with American Construction, and so they were doing some as needed repairs to the north dolphins as well as the wing walls. And so that same crew was over on Vashon. If you were over on Vashon last week, you might have seen them over there. So they've been moving around. They'll finish up here next week. They plan to head then off to Kingston and Clinton and parts north before they come back in hopefully about a month and a half, 2 months to finish up the Cathlamet work. So with that, if there are any questions on that, we'll try to save questions for the end. I do appreciate everybody's partnership on this project and your patience as we get the existing terminal back in shape and look forward to building a new terminal. So with that, let me hand it over to Hadley and kind of cover our logistics and then go through the agenda.
Great, thanks, Dave. For those that don't know me, my name is Hadley Rodero. I am the Strategic Communications Manager at Washington State Ferries, and for this project, I'm leading the community engagement. Before we start, I want to welcome all the community members who have just joined us. And even though you're not part of the CAG, you're welcome to listen in. You'll be in listen-only mode tonight, and you will not have access to submit comments in the chat box, as is our usual format, so that the CAG members can talk among themselves. You won't be able to submit comments in the chat, but you will be able to submit comments or other thoughts to our project inbox, and Laura will send that email to you in the chat box. We monitor that email daily, and we'll get back to you and answer your questions. We also log all public comments in a log that we share with the advisory groups ahead of each of their meetings and with the project team regularly. And all members of our community advisory group received the latest comment log a couple days ago. So they're pretty familiar with what we're hearing from the community. And just a reminder that these meetings are recorded and they'll be posted on the project website for anyone who's not able to attend live. They can watch a recording of it afterward. So tonight, our regular facilitator, who many of you know, Lauren, is out sick. So another member of our community engagement team, Laura, is going to work with me to facilitate the meeting, and she's going to take it from here and walk us through the agenda and some of the logistics. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Hadley. So I think we are all familiar with using Zoom by now, but here are just a few friendly reminders about the features we will use during tonight's meeting. So to make sure you are with us and your chat box is working, please answer this question in the chat and send to everyone. Your name, the community you represent, and one highlight from your summer. Great, thanks everyone. Looks like a lot of enjoying beautiful Pacific Northwest. So if you're not able to see the answers in the chat, please do raise your hand. And if at any point we're going too fast or you didn't hear something, please let us know and we will circle back. You can take us to the next slide, Haley. So for the rest of the meeting today, we will aim to explain how the Community Advisory Group and the CAG and community feedback was used to develop the Level 2 screening report, which we sent to you by email on Monday. First on the agenda is an overview of where we are in the Pell process, an in-depth look at our Level 2 screening, and then plenty of time for questions and discussions at the end of the presentation. So what you're seeing on the screen there, that's the roadmap that we've been sharing with you over the past year or so with all of the steps in the Pell process. And as we've said before, these steps represent steps, or the boxes represent steps in the process rather than the individual meeting. Today, we are going to be covering 3 of the steps. We're reviewing some themes from our community engagement, Level 2 screening results, and alternatives carrying into the environmental phase. Are there any questions about the agenda or what we hope to accomplish tonight? Great. I think with that, we will pass over to Hadley for the next slide.
Okay, thanks, Laura. So I'm just going to quickly catch you up since we haven't met since May. And in the meantime, we had a round of public engagement with a couple virtual community meetings and an online open house that was open for about a month, and lots of other comments that came in various ways. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone had a chance to read the community engagement summary that we sent you earlier in the summer, and we sent it again a few days ago. And that you're kind of familiar with the key themes of what we heard from the community. The next slide illustrates some of these key themes. We received 477 comments during that approximately month-long period where we were asking for input on our Level 1 screening and the alternatives that we were going to carry forward into the next phase of the review process. In total, over the last year and a half or so, we've received over 1,000 comments from the community on this project, which is a lot, and you've seen many of those comments. So some of the key themes that we've heard are on the Pell process. They represent a wide range of interests and ideas for replacing the terminal. We've heard widespread support for improving terminal operations, reducing congestion, and improving safety, and that support came from all 3 of the communities on the Triangle route. Many ferry passengers, those that ride the ferry regularly, want an expanded dock to help alleviate some of the operational challenges and help sort of improve the customer experience. The terminal neighbors, Fauntleroy residents and others in West Seattle, in their comments were vocal about opposition to expanding the terminal and specifically to impacting some of the resources near the existing Fauntleroy terminal, Cove Park, and other things. These comments and discussions with our 3 advisory groups really indicate that there's currently some controversy over what the right solution is for replacing the dock, and a significant level of coordination that we need to do with agencies to kind of continue to narrow down the range of alternatives and work with you, the community advisory group, and our technical advisory group, and our executive advisory group. So we're seeing kind of balanced support for 2 of the alternatives, 2 different solutions. You can see on the graphic that we did not hear from as many folks in South Kitsap County and Southworth. So that's something that we noted. And we know that in our future engagement efforts, and next time we do a round of public outreach, we need to do a better job of reaching out to those communities and engaging them. So those of you who represent Southworth and the communities over there might want to give some thought, and we'd love any feedback you have on that. We heard about 56% of our comments came from Vashon Islanders, and then a total of a little less than 40% came from this side of the water, 20% from the Fauntleroy neighborhood itself, and then other areas in Seattle and elsewhere. So I hope that helps kind of bring it all together from what you saw in the community engagement summary, and I'll pause for questions on that in a few minutes. I also wanted to just bring up our public comment log that we sent you a few days ago, as we always do. The themes from the comment log over the summer echo much of what we heard in the community outreach, and many of those same themes that I was just showing. We've received about 14 new comments since May. Those continue to be concerns about potential impacts to Cove Park, suggestions on various project alternatives, and questions about the project's process and the screening and sort of the schedule for the project. And then some questions about implementation of good to go or other strategies and how we're going to study those. So Laura, I think I'll just pause for a minute before we pass it over to Marcia. Are there any questions about the comment log or public comment in general? No. Okay, well, you can also, if something occurs to you later on as we discuss these themes in greater detail, you can ask it at the end of the meeting. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our environmental lead, Marcia Tolan, who's going to talk a little bit more about where we are in the planning and environmental linkages planning study process and our next steps. Marcia.
Thanks, Hadley. So as you can see from the slide, it's a very familiar graphic to you, which we've used all along the way during our process. It just gives you an idea of where we are and where we are today, sharing level 2 report with you for input and where we've been and where we're also headed. You can see also here, also doing a good to go study in the same, it's occurring in the same time frame as the PEL report. And as we're moving into environmental review, we'll talk more about that good to go study towards the end of the meeting. So I'd like to just review a little bit with you about what NEPA, NEPA, and SEPA, SEPA.
Marcia, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm getting a lot of messages from members of our audience who are joining us today. And I think some of them might have missed the meeting, the announcement at the beginning of the meeting, that for members of the community who are listening in on the community advisory group, you're not able to have access to chat. It's just for our advisory group members. And that's been our typical process for the last year and a half as we've been meeting as a group. Any public comments can be sent to the email address that's in the chat. And that's where those comments all get put into the comment log that we were just talking about a few minutes ago. So I hope that helps clarify the process for this group. Sorry to interrupt you, Marcia.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I'm glad you could clarify that for folks who are listening in.
Marcia,
So,
Frank had his hand up if you want to take a question now.
okay.
Yeah, and thanks, Dave. Marcia, could you go back one slide? I think I just had a question on the the bottom, it says concurrence with WSF and FHWA. What is FWHA?
The FHWA is the Federal
Right.
Highway Administration, and they're the
Okay.
federal lead agency for the project. So as we move through each of the milestones, we coordinate with FHWA, and they concur, or they also guide us along each step. Because I think you'll see it on the webpage, and you'll see it in many of the materials, even in the level 1 screening report and the level 2 screening report. You'll see a citation from the Code of Federal Register which is the act guiding the planning and environmental leakages process by FHWA. And so as we move along and are following that guidance, that's what that check mark means.
So again, just so I can clarify this for myself, that they're just involved in the process, not in the details. This is a state project, state highway. It's not a federal highway. But the federal, I understood you to say that the Pell and the NEPA process were governed by the Federal Highway Administration. So is that correct?
That's correct. And so it
Okay.
is a federal process, and they're the federal lead, and we are known as a proponent of the project. That's because we have federal approvals and permits to comply with.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So we're getting closer to transitioning from a planning phase more into the environmental review process that's guided by the national and state environmental policy acts. So I wanted to briefly reintroduce what that means to you and means to us. NEPA stands for the National Environmental Policy Act, and it requires federal agencies to assess and publicly share environmental effects of proposed actions before deciding to build a project. In the same way, SEPA, SEPA, the State Environmental Policy Act, requires state agencies to conduct environmental review, and it's conducted in a similar manner as NEPA. So we're working with the Federal Highway Administration to identify the potential impacts and appropriate level of documentation as we move through the process, of which the goal is for the environmental analysis is to find an alternative with the least possible impacts that is buildable. And we'll analyze those impacts to the built to natural environment. And that analysis includes things such as transportation flow, visual impacts, marine environments, park and recreation resources. And we follow both of those acts, the NEPA and the national and the state acts, because the project will involve federal and state permits and approvals. Next slide. So here we are at level 2 overview. We're moving closer to the alternatives and what will be evaluated under NEPA and SEPA. For this analysis, we used criteria outlined in the level 1 screening report, and we'll describe that in more detail. We considered the environment surroundings, the environment that's surrounding the Fauntleroy Ferry terminal, and we selected criteria based on input from the advisory groups and the Triangle Route communities, as Hadley has explained in the previous part of this presentation. We incorporated feedback both from the CAG, which is you, and our technical advisory group, the TAG, and community outreach during level 1. So I'd like to move on to the next slide. So before Mark describes in more detail what those alternatives are that were brought into level 2, I'd like to show you the matrix and describe some of the criteria for those alternatives. And we focused around on the criteria which was the same as for level 1. And it was everything that we had gathered from our meetings with the CAG and the TAG and the broader community. And those are operations and customer experience, safety, multimodal connections, traffic circulation, park and recreational areas, permitting, and coordination. And these are the alternatives that were advanced from level 1 and carried into level 2 screening. They are what they represent are the alternatives for the existing Fauntleroy site, which were to replace the dock. And they represent the alternatives which showed an expansion of the dock. The existing dock would still hold 80 vehicles, and then the expanded dock would be one that could hold vehicles from up to 186 in number. After the initial analysis of using the alternatives, some of them scored a little lower than we initially scored them on level 1, and therefore those will not move forward into environmental review. But as you see here, this is the results of the level 1 screening, and it's the same matrix that's in the level 1 screening report and showing what those scores are. But the information we just provided for you now is are the results of the level 2 screening report. And those circular updates, they show that a 4 through 7 have 3 or more unlikely to meet categories and are not advancing. This includes the 2-lane holding, 2-direction approach, and remote holding options. So Mark will walk you through the scores to explain how these changed and show you more about the alternatives.
All right, thank you, Marcia. So as Marcia said, I'm going to focus on the 4 alternatives that have been screened out based on this further look at those criteria in our level 2 phase. And for those CAG members, you received this draft report that we sent out that has some of the information that I'll touch on at a high level. So if you want to track along with that, go to the next slide. So this is alternative A4, and as a reminder, this is adding 2-lane holding along Fauntleroy Way. And we heard clearly from you, the CAG, as well as the TAG, and the community about this option not really being viable from its multimodal effects perspective. And as we looked at it further, we also identified that it had lower scores in the operational efficiency and customer experience category, as well as safety. One of the things that this alternative would have done is converted the southbound lane on Fauntleroy Way into that second holding lane. In terms of multimodal impacts, that would require a pretty substantial reroute of the Rapid Ride C line and have an impact there, as well as create additional difficulties for people that are walking across Fauntleroy Way or biking along Fauntleroy Way with a added complexities of the holding lane operation. From an operational efficiency perspective, the 2 holding lanes being designated for each destination requires that the toll booths be staffed more full-time than they might otherwise need to be based on the demand, which decreases the efficiency for WSF. And then in terms of safety, as I mentioned, there's some additional conflict points as people go across Fauntleroy Way, walking or driveway access across 2 different lanes that may have different queuing lengths. So for those reasons, as noted at the bottom, this one scored lower in those categories.
Mark, I just want to point out that there's a couple of comments in the chat here, and just want to note to Victoria and Judy that we will we'll be talking about that once we get through the series of alternatives. And the question is around if A2 and A3 could be combined into one alternative. So just hang tight and we'll get there.
All right, Thanks, Laura. Yeah, we're going to take some comments here, questions at the end here. So let's go to the, oh, sorry. Let's go to the next alternative, A5. So A5 is the holding from two directions. So this would add holding along Wildwood Place, and we've shown it as for the Southworth destination. We also heard questions and skepticism about this alternative from both the CAG and the TAG. And as we went into our level 2 review, we identified additional issues that lowered its score in the operational efficiency and safety as well. With respect to operational efficiency, one of the things that this two-direction of holding would create is basically a conflict of traffic at the intersection where it goes onto the terminal. You have traffic coming from both directions, and the holding lane from for Wildwood Place would have to cross from the right side of the street left into the terminal at the same time as the other holding lane from the north is occurring. This is going to require likely a complex left turn and signal to manage that, or staffing to be out there. And the other operational inefficiency that we noted with this is that with each holding lane being for a particular destination, new or infrequent ferry customers might arrive from the incorrect direction and have to find a way to go past and turn around to get into the correct holding lane. In terms of safety, this adds, of course, it increases the number of conflict points between the ferry holding lane and residential driveways. In addition to what's on Fauntleroy Way, it adds it on Wildwood Place. Also, if you note the sharper curve there, providing a holding lane creates some challenges there for transit and other large vehicles through that tighter corner, and so that's got potential vehicle conflicts. And then in terms of multimodal, one of the issues this alternative would have created is that by bringing the holding lane up to the terminal entrance, that would likely require a relocation of the transit stop potentially further from the terminal and decreasing that connectivity. We also noted in our updated, our level 2 analysis, some environmental and in the form of parks and recreational activities, as well as permitting. And one of the things that at the terminal intersection we noted here is that it could impact the vegetation right at basically the intersection of the terminal drive, which would require us to do extensive coordination with the city of Seattle. Let's go on to alternative A6. So A6 is the first of two of the remote holding alternatives. This has a remote holding area that's up near 47th and Fauntleroy Way. And sorry, get back to my notes. I turned too early. This one, some of the things we noted here is that this would displace a gas station as well as some single family and multifamily residential housing. One thing to note is the holding area has to accommodate the same range of vehicles and types of vehicles that go onto the ferry system. And so it can be, it's something rather large to accommodate that. From an operations efficiency and customer experience perspective, this type of operation complicates the operation for WSF and customers because you have to coordinate the release of vehicles from a remote holding area to go down Fauntleroy Way with the right amount of time to fill in on dock spaces as they become available. In terms of safety, this would introduce new conflict points for people that are walking, biking, driving in and around the remote holding area. It also would change the bicycle pedestrian infrastructure connectivity in that area, as you can see through the likely need to close that short street that's near the yellow label on the graphic there. In terms of multimodal, another multimodal impact, this does also likely require the relocation of a transit stop that's near the remote holding area. In terms of some of the environmental considerations, as I noted, the residential displacement, as well as the gas station. And then it also, construction of the site and operation of this remote holding area could increase noise for the nearby residences that remain. Go on to the next alternative, A7. So A7 is the second of the remote holding options that we're screening out at this point. This was the one that was near Fauntleroy Park itself. It has operationally the similar issues that I just alluded to for the one that was further up upstream. In addition to that, as you can see, this displaces parking that is used for Lincoln Park, as well as some of the park itself, and also has impacts to additional bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. And so to summarize, as we looked at these additional criteria in level 2 at this further for these 4 alternatives, they've all had updated scores in several categories that are now at the low or no likelihood to meet, and therefore we're screening them out from further consideration. And now I'll hand it back to Marcia to talk about what did pass through level 2 and where we're heading from here.
Thanks, Mark.
And Marcia,
look-
just before you get started, it looks like Marty had her hand up, but I see it just went down. So maybe you wanted to hold, Marty.
Yes, I want to hold.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, looking back at the results table here, you can see where the scores marked with arrows dropped for the alternatives that are not advancing to the next stage of environmental review. Our scores for the remaining alternatives A1, A2, A3, B, and C did not change in level 2. And the scores for the remaining alternatives did not change. But one thing to note is that alternative C has 2 reds, one of which signifies impacts to parks and recreation areas known as 4F resources, section 4F resources. And that includes impacts, that includes Cove Park. So one thing we could identify at this point is that the potential impacts to Cove Park in alternative C, therefore WSF will no longer consider alternative C in its configuration that widened the dock as shown in level 1 to accommodate 186 vehicles. So it's that configuration as it was previously shown, and you can see that there with the large red X. And we're combining alternatives B and C into a single expanded dock alternative that would be designed to avoid or minimize permanent environmental impacts. And while we're by minimizing the environmental impacts, we're still providing on dock holding for 186 cars. At this planning level, these alternatives would be documented in the PEL study and go forward to our further schematic design development to assist environmental review. And so as you see here too, for alternatives A2 and A3, the same dock with good to go or advanced ticketing. We're working with our consultants to study the viability of implementing those systems at Fauntleroy, and we'll use those results during the environmental review. And we'll talk a little more about that, during the Q&A session. So it's now, as you see here, basically 2 alternatives, one that represents the existing terminal and one that represents an expanded terminal. So from here, we'll work with FHWA to determine the format for the environmental review under NEPA. And we'll have more information for you, hopefully in future meetings. So I'll turn it back to Laura for now.
Thank you, Marcia, and thank you everyone for your patience. I know there's a number of comments and questions queuing up in the chat here, and we really want to hear from you. So specifically, we need to know if there is anything else we are missing before screening out A4, A5, A6, and A7. Scott, I saw your hand go up, and I'll see your comment in the chat.
Yes, thank you very much. The first thing is I want to commend you on eliminating the widening of the dock and therefore protecting Cove Park. I thought that's a good alternative there. Moving the dock out longer, I think, is a good way to address the ongoing needs. Two questions that I have. The first thing is under the A123, it's mentioned advanced ticketing and good to go, and I'm confused why that wouldn't be included in the accommodation BC. I think it would just make it more efficient all the way around. So why limit it to maintaining the same size dock and not take advantage of these additional enhancements? The second thing, which I think is important, which I mentioned a couple of times involved here, I know a number of people are concerned about the dock going too far out into the sound, and I would hope that somebody would be looking at, or has looked at, engineering wise, why we couldn't have a second level to the dock. Conceivably, I disagree with the idea of having on 124, but if we ended up with 124, you could probably almost put 124 cars on the same size dock if you had a second level. And so I just hope that people would consider that additional option as well. That's what I have.
Thank you, Scott. Mark, do you want to answer those questions? I know we do have some information queued up to talk a little bit more about the Good to Go study, Good to Go and advanced ticketing study after the Q&A. So we are going to talk more about what's coming in that process. But that first part of Scott's question around applying advanced ticketing for other options, Mark, and then similarly, that other question around terminal design option.
Sure. Scott and others, yeah, as part of our study that you'll touch on here in a minute, the following stuff, we will look at sort of permutations and combinations of Good to Go, advanced ticketing, and certainly if they, prove viable, and viable means a lot of things. There's cost implications, there's customer implications that those things will be assessing. To the degree that those are all viable approaches, and working with the Transportation Commission, et cetera. There's a whole sets of dialogues to be had. We could certainly look at what does that look like with the expanded dock in terms of its the merits and benefits of it. With respect to the idea of basically a top deck or second deck, I'll speak a little bit out of my field here. We do have some people that can kind of chime in here, but a couple of the first things that I consider, or that occur to me, is whether the fleet of vessels is designed to accept a dual height loading of vehicles. That, as I think about all the loading operations I've personally done or experienced or witnessed, I'm not sure the vessels are designed for that. But I would ask that maybe Dave Sowers and or Doug Plater jump in and kind of add to that.
That wasn't my suggestion. I wasn't going to make the entire dock 2 stories. I was going to have part of the dock storing there. No, you'd only be loading from the single level. So you would, yeah, you would only be loading from a single level here, but you could, on a dock that holds 80 cars now, you probably could put double 2 stories, 120, 130 hours and still have a single level.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay, so you're having to come back down to a single ramp. But anyways, yes.
Correct.
So I'm still going to toss this to Dave and Doug, who have much more versed experience in terminal and dock designs than I do.
Yeah, Interesting idea, Scott. I would have to say that it's probably more expensive to build a double-decker structure, and the seismic demands on the structure are much greater. So the lower level has to be much stiffer and stronger than if you build it's like the difference between building a long house versus a 2 or 3 story house. There's a lot of economy in that. But I mean, it's something certainly we could look at. I'm guessing I'm right, but we can look at that. I just think the cost, it's probably why we don't have any of those in our system as it is. It's far less expensive to just extend the dock out and get the capacity you need there. I wanted to go back to the first part of Mark's question just to add something, which is in the maintain the existing 80-car facility, the purpose and need statement requires us, and I'll paraphrase, to improve the operational efficiency and throughput and safety and bike ped modes. And the idea that good to go and or advanced ticketing, it's necessary in that option in order to improve upon the current state of the operations out there. When you lengthen the dock or add to the dock capacity, those operational issues become less of a problem. And so while advanced ticketing good to go would certainly work in any size facility, they're less of a necessary need in a larger facility because you have that extra space to improve your operations and your loading and unloading, where you don't have that in the current configuration. So that's why those two got lumped in with the A1 option. Laura?
Judy?
Well, David, I respectfully suggest that you may have the cart before the horse. If we have efficient ticketing such that most cars can bypass the toll booth and be ready to load, then why do we need a bigger parking lot over the water? Why do we need to compromise environmental considerations for the good of a capacity that likely will not be justified if efficient ticketing is in place?
Well, so Judy, we are, and I think Charlie Torres was going to talk about this a little bit next in the slides. We are starting up an analysis of the good to go concept of an implementation at Fauntleroy. So we are taking the recommendation and suggestions from the community, and something that's been talked about for years. And we're beginning that to get the consultant on board to do some technical analysis and kind of flesh out the pros and cons and the challenges and the advantages and potentially disadvantages of operating a good to go system at Fauntleroy and even potentially at other ferry terminals.
And Laura, maybe you could go back to that slide with the 2 alternatives you're carrying forward, because Judy, I think what Dave was trying to say is that's why we're keeping that same size dock alternative on the table, because you're exactly right. If you could make that efficient ticketing, as you said, solution work, then you'd have a dock that's the same capacity as today. So that's why that's one of the alternatives that we're going to continue to study, because we've heard a lot of support from it, and it's something that's worth studying further.
Yeah, thanks, Hadley. Judy, does that make sense here, that the A1, the A2, and the A3 are all essentially one alternative that we're going to explore, and how the A2, A3 pieces of that fit in will be something that the team starts working on right away.
Does that answer the questions in the chat from Victoria and Judy? You had it too about combining A2 and A3. Victoria, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, I was just confused why it wasn't both. I mean, why not have both? We already have advanced ticketing. I just didn't understand why they were treated as either or that's the way it was presented to me. But I also had my hand up because I need maybe some reminder. when we're talking about keeping the existing footprint versus expanding, what is the analysis of traffic, the traffic numbers actually going down somewhat with more walk-on trips? Like we saw to offset when the ferry went out. So are those expectations of increased traffic flow from Vashon and Southburg still expected to grow as projected? Or are we seeing that that people are taking alternative methods to get to their locations?
We're still using the long-range plan, not so much, it's not driven so much by the growth of the ridership, but the vessels that serve the route. And this route is still going to have 324 car ferries serving it. And then the walk-on capacity is, we don't usually reach walk-on capacity at all. So there's plenty of that. So the constraint is the size of the vessel and the vehicles showing up to fill that 124 car ferry. And with the 80 car dock, you need to process them through the toll booth while you're loading the ferry. So it's not really driven by the growth so much, but by the 3 ferries that will serve the route. And that's just projected into the future.
And I'm sorry, when I said walk-ons, I know I was confusing you. I meant taking the walk-on ferry, not walking on our existing ferries, but taking the people that just get on and go directly downtown or wherever they're going, or the conveyance route that was put in place this summer.
Right. I mean, again, we're still planning to run 324 car ferries, even with the addition of Kitsap Transit's service from Southworth and King County's service from Vashon.
So is there a reason why the good to go and the advanced ticketing were kept separate? I guess I'm still not clear on that. Why they just aren't both combined? I know you have to study them separately, but as an alternative.
I think they were looked at as, they're related, but separate. They're different utility, and
Advanced
ticketing, I think somebody pointed out, we already have, in a sense, advanced ticketing. We just don't have it as a policy. It's an option. And so I think the question here is, what if you made it a policy that you could only come to the terminal if you prepaid? So that was one thing. The good to go is much, much more complex. There's equity issues. There's connectivity issues. There's just a lot of different things. It's a little bit different than having a prepaid ticket. And so I think that's kind of why they seem to be similar, but they're different enough that we started out as 2 different alternatives. Now we're kind of putting them all together, and we're gonna as part of the study that I've asked the consultant team to produce related to good to go, we do have the advanced ticketing component captured in there, so we can flesh out the policy side of it, the fare collection side of it, all of the nuances of how it would work, and how it's fair and equitable to all types of riders and all. We're trying to kind of streamline this by bringing those 2 together because of your exact point, Victoria, but they started out as different alternatives. Fletcher, you had a question.
Yeah, it's a little more of a comment, but it's just that we're talking about kind of storing the cars on the dock, but the alternative is storing them in the neighborhood. It's like the cars aren't just nowhere. And there actually are a fair number of comments from Fauntleroy residents like asking for a bigger dock because it would reduce the number of cars idling in the neighborhood and being in front of their driveways. So that's just, it's not like nobody from Fauntleroy is is interested in a bigger dock. It would impact the neighborhood.
Right, Fletcher, thanks for pointing that out, because I should have made that more clear when I was summarizing the public comments, and that's what we were getting at, that we heard sort of wide-ranging support for both of these concepts, the same size dock with the vehicle holding in the neighborhood along Fauntleroy Way, as shown in the top graphic there, that the line would still be as it is today along Fauntleroy Way a good bit of the time, and a bigger dock solution. So, and some of them were Fauntleroy residents, honestly, who didn't want the traffic in front of their driveways or blocking Lincoln Park and other issues. It wasn't just a sort of Vashon and Fauntleroy split at all.
Thank you, Fletcher. Marty, I think I saw your hand go up, and then Susan.
Yeah, so, and I see a comment from Richard Thorpe in the chat. So what I wanted to do was respond a little bit to David Sauer's latest statements, and say that I'm not arguing for A6 to come back, but I am thinking that I would like the study that's doing good to go and advanced ticketing to consider distant toll booth. And not the way you guys had it drawn, but have it that the toll booth is on the south end of a very small parking lot that's only the size of the gas station area. And this would be like the kiosk that Richard Thorpe is asking about, so that people that need to buy tickets could then do that and enter the queue directly right away with no holding and release. So if that could also be incorporated, I know you already said that the study is going to be talked about a little bit later after this Q&A, but you know, I wanted to mention that. And I also want to mention that I am very glad to know that good to go. I mean, that Cove Park will remain and has a 4F standard. That's really a key environmental gain for our neighborhood, and not just our neighborhood. Vashon and Southworth folks also use that as a respite when there's long ferry lines. That's it.
Laura, do you want to read Richard's comment? Because it's so that the audience members can hear it. I think it's a great comment, Richard.
Yeah, I was just going to do that, especially Dave's comment about the equity component of good to go. So just bringing Richard's comment in for everyone listening in from the community, saying that I think good to go is a good idea, but there are people who don't have credit or bank accounts that can qualify for whatever reason to get one and have to pay with cash. Could we set up, Could we set up an offsite ticket booth, kiosk, or merchant to accommodate those people, and where would probably have to sign notices in the area for instructions? Thank you for bringing that into the conversation, Richard, and something that when we get to the good to go slide, we can talk about further what will be studied as part of that. I know there's a number of other comments that are queuing up, but Susan, you have been waiting patiently, so I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo what Fletcher was saying about the traffic in this option 1 being queued up on the Fauntleroy, because the screening summary, there was a lot of community feedback about the dangerous driving habits that occur with people trying to U-turn and whatnot into a line on the Fauntleroy Road, and also the conflicts with the homes there. And so it just feels like the option 2, where we expand the terminal, just gets all that traffic and conflict off the road, and just makes for a cleaner solution for safety and efficiency. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Also some comments in the chat here. There's one from Anne about the bigger dock will also allow for more room for vehicles to leave the ferry, which should decrease dwell time. Loading the multiple destinations should be more accurate if it's clear when the ferry arrives and how many people are going to each destination. Thank you for bringing that comment in, Anne. Angus?
I'm curious, looking at A1, how A1 survives kind of without one of these level 2 bolded arrows, just in that it's essentially doing nothing, and it's not really meeting the ability to improve operational efficiency, and I don't really see a means by which it ever would.
Well, I'll try to tackle the first part of that, Angus, and part of it is that the terminal itself isn't, the issues with the terminal themselves are not operational only. We have a seismically deficient facility. It's old, it's in disrepair. We're out there every year working on it, and we have the sea level rise issue that we're trying to address. So it's not just replacing it with timber piling at the same elevation and the same, vulnerability. It is going to be an improved facility. But it is going to essentially be the same size. And so that prevents us from expanding additionally over water and reduces the environmental impact. But the trade-off is, to your point, is it does impact the operations. And so the idea with the Good to Go study, which includes this advanced ticketing, is to sort of explore, Marty's waving at us, to explore how Good to Go, and I know there's some skeptics out there, how Good to Go could, or elements of Good to Go could be brought in to improve operations. And, you're kind of jumping ahead, but maybe you're right. Maybe they don't provide a significant advantage. We don't know that yet. And we don't know how easy or hard it will be to implement Good to Go. So those all kind of got brought into this A1 option. But at the core of the project, we have to replace the existing structure with something. And that's kind of how A1 evolved.
Right. So I understand the Good to Go option. I think it's a good option. I just, A1 is distinct here from A2 and A3. I don't see how A1 survives your level 2 review.
Well, it doesn't in the sense that it's got to include these other two elements. There has to be some operational improvements that those two, A2 and A3, offer.
Okay.
To really make it viable. And so that's why we're taking both of these options into the next phase of environmental review.
Sure.
We want this sort of A1 with the supplemental features as option 1, and then we want to look at an expanded dock that's somewhere between 124 and 186 as a second alternative. And again, with that alternative, we don't know exactly what size it would be either. We have to look at the impacts and all the factors that play into that. But we tried to simplify, starting with 15 alternatives at the beginning of this, to narrow it down to 9, and now narrow it down to 2, and we've combined these a little bit to do that.
Dave, isn't the idea that we're so early in the planning level that, as Angus pointed out, we don't know what benefits Good to Go or advanced ticketing or other sort of strategies would be? So even if those two don't work, there might be other operational improvements that could be added to A1 to address the other things Dave mentioned, the sea level and the seismic. I mean, that just may be what we have to move forward with, because there's challenges with expanding the dock as well, that the environmental review may, make that become less viable if there's impacts to the environment with that, and cost and all these other things. So we didn't want to take it off the table this early if that sort of narrows down to become the only option at some point.
Yep. Thank you, Hadley. That's great.
Thanks, Hadley. Just want to call attention to Scott's comment in the chat here, noting some concern about Good to Go and advanced ticketing to achieve the needed operational efficiencies, since these have never been implemented. And if it does fail, we will be left with an inefficient operation for decades. Thank you for sharing that concern with the group, Scott. And Frank, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you.
Before Frank starts, can I just offer a comment on Scott's, which is, we are looking at a pilot project, Scott. So we would try to test some of these ideas out before we implemented them. So just, if that helps any. I'm sorry, Frank, go ahead.
No problem, Dave. A comment and then a question. The comment has a few points to it. One, I think the advanced ticketing, I think that one of the big problems here, and I live right next to the dock, I see this dock operation every single day. This truly is a 4-hour-a-day problem. It doesn't happen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It doesn't happen at 10 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't happen at 11 o'clock at night. It happens between, say, 3 to 7. On the weekends, it certainly happens during the day a little bit. But to wholesalely change a structure because you have a temporary problem, I think that's something that we all kind of need to think of and look at. Everybody here is concerned because they're trying to get home, and they want to get home, and they don't want to have to wait, and they don't want to do things. But anyway, coming back to my comments, I think that education is a key point, and I think it's something that is so overlooked here. Your advanced ticketing you have now, which is where you can buy tickets online, right? I don't know if everybody does that, and why don't they do it? Because they don't know about it? Well, okay, maybe we can work on informing people or educating people about how to do that. Maybe you could have a couple of signs along the line saying, hey, Have you got your ticket yet? Go to www whatever and buy it with your phone. I mean, I think more people would do that, because with the dual destination boats, I very seldom see a boat leaving less than full. Actually, I don't know that I've never seen it, but I doubt it happens if things are going well. Because the processing, you can load 80 cars right away. And then as those cars are loading, the processing handles that. If there's people that are using the pre-ticketed or the remote ticket or electronic ticket, it goes through real quick. As Marty has said many times, it takes seconds. If somebody's paying, it takes a little bit longer, but try and change that shift a little bit so you get more people doing it electronically. I think you'd find that processing to be very quick. If you want to park on the ferry dock and not have to move until the next boat comes, that's an entirely different subject we should be talking about. That's, it's not handling, that's not efficiency. That's just because people don't want to be inconvenienced. And I can totally appreciate that. I get it. So I just wanted to bring that up. I think that if we could do better education, better signage, just a whole lot better stuff on the street, I think that would go a long ways. My question was, and I'll get off my horse, is the expansion with the BC now, the longer dock, was that the original intention of the project originally? In other words, is the cost, when is cost going to come into, because I think now it's replacing every piece of the dock versus just the trestle and the other portion. Maybe that was originally included, but when is cost going to come into the screening is my question.
Well, I'll start, and then maybe Doug, if he's got any comments on costs. I mean, we haven't done a rigorous cost analysis of either of the 124, the 186, and with the different sizes, whether it's expanded to the north or expanded to the west. We just haven't done that, Frank. This was the numbers that were originally budgeted, the 94 million that was set up for this was based on meeting our terminal design manual, which is a 186 car facility. But you're making a great point. There's all these changes that would happen as the thing gets pushed further offshore. So we'd have to come back and try to answer that after we've done some cost analysis. I don't know, Doug, can you add anything else to that?
Yeah, no, other than we haven't done any cost analysis yet. And so it could shape the size in the future, but we haven't done it yet.
Yeah. It's a good point. This thing's got to fit into the budget too.
Yeah, thank you.
And Frank, to your first point about education, education and increased marketing on advanced ticketing, Charlie, maybe you can speak to it, but that is part of the scope of work of what will be studied for advanced ticketing. I saw it in there this morning, looking at marketing policy, getting the word out about advanced ticketing, and then you could go all the way from there up to requiring advanced ticketing. So there's sort of those different solutions are what's going to be studied in the study we keep alluding to. Charlie, do you have anything to add on that? No, you're on mute if you're trying to talk.
I don't, we have some wiggle room in our scope as we planned on coming to you, the CAG and the TAG, and sharing our draft results and listen to what you have to say. And if we're missing things, we can make some changes to our study. And we would hope that you would help us, you would influence that study.
Thanks, Charlie. See, John also has a note here about removing idling cars off the street as more than a matter of convenience. It also eliminates some amount of emissions. Thank you for adding that to the conversation, John. And then Susan is asking a question here about advanced ticketing. What percentage of riders use advanced ticketing? Most of the cars I see ahead of me in line are using it. I'd argue that there's already a large percentage of riders that are using the advanced ticketing as they're motivated to get on the ferry faster. Hadley or Dave, do you know if we have any data points around that?
I don't know, but I think we could figure that out. Hadley, do you?
I don't know off the top of my head the data. I do think we do have it, and I think that some of it is documented in some previous studies done by the University of Washington about advanced ticketing and operations, and those are the studies that we're going to use to sort of kick off the focused white paper study that we're starting for this project.
Yeah. So you have a question from Greg?
Yeah, Greg.
I don't necessarily have a question as much as I have a comment or several, and they're kind of in line with Frank. As a daily rider at peak travel times, my observation is that ticketing is not necessarily the issue because the dock is full. We have an 80-car dock because we had 80-car ferries. We have 124 car ferries today. The ability to expand that dock to 120 cars gets 40 cars off the street, which means there's no line. There's a shorter line in those peak travel times. And again, my opinion, but I see it daily. The challenge with the ticket booth isn't necessarily advanced ticketing because you'd see the biggest hangups with tourist traffic in the summer. Which is very common. People have to pay, people have to ask questions. Where's this boat going? What time's going to be here? And the ferry staff does a great job. Honestly, I know most of them by name. I've been riding the ferry so long. They do a wonderful job. The other challenge you have is being dual destination, you almost always overload the Vashon side, which stops traffic flow because it can't handle any more cars getting on the dock. And I'm a Southworth passenger, and I've seen Southworth line with 4 cars, and we can't get on the dock because Vashon has both sides blocked. So advanced ticketing, I think, is good, but I don't know how you make it function well. Because especially, like I say, during the summer months with tourist traffic. And again, Frank is right. This is a 4-hour-a-day problem.
Thank you, Greg. Dave, anything you'd like to say in response to those comments? Appreciate you bringing that into the conversation, Greg.
No, I thought that was good. That was good. I appreciate that. I don't think I have anything else to add.
I saw a hand go up and then it went away. Anna.
Just a comment, or wanted to point something out, that if advanced ticketing and good to go were to solve all the efficiency problems, I don't think that's dependent on replacing the dock. I think it could have already been done. So I just want to point out that don't look at it. I don't look at it as a combined solution, because I don't think you have to totally replace the dock in order to implement those two things. I also don't think that just adding good to go and requiring advanced ticketing is going to solve all the other problems, whereas expanding the dock, although it may not solve all problems, is going to solve many more problems than just adding good to go and advanced ticketing.
Yeah, I think that's part of why we, in response to the community's feedback, this idea that's been percolating for many, many years about good to go. We obviously use it on the highway side of things and in the tunnel and on 520 and elsewhere. It seemed like it's been talked about for long enough. We wanted to put this study together. We've got a consultant on board, Jacobs, to help us with this, kind of explore all the pros and cons. We all have our preconceived ideas of what will work and what won't work, but let's at least run through the analysis. Let's, as somebody said earlier, well, how many people use advanced ticketing? Let's figure that out. Is it 20%? Is it 80%? Those things all can kind of come into this study. And then, like I said earlier, if there's a way to pilot a study or pilot a project that then allows us to use some form of good to go in a 6-month trial period, either during construction or before construction, I think that would be great to help kind of flesh out what would work, and then how to tweak that and make it work. And but I don't want to try to establish any preconceived ideas that things will work or won't work. I think it's important that we be objective and we do the study and see where the chips fall.
Thanks for sharing that perspective, Anna. Richard, I see you have your hand up. Richard, did you have a question or a comment?
You might need directions on how to unmute on the phone.
Yes. Scott, I know you're still with us. I think that is *9. Is that correct?
It's *6.
*6. So Richard, if you would like to hit *6 to unmute. Looks like you might have hit it. There you go. Looks like you're unmuted, so you can go ahead and speak when you're able to. Richard, we are not able to hear you if you are speaking. Maybe Scott can follow up with you online to see if he can sort out the tech issues. Great, thanks, Scott. So Frank has a question here in the chat. If the number of people using electronic or advanced ticketing could be shared at a future meeting. I think I heard Dave said we would at least look into getting that information, see if that's something that's available.
Yep, I wrote it down, so we'll find it and get it back to the whole group.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we move along to talking a little bit more about the Good to Go and advanced ticket study?
Laura, before we move on, I just kind of wanted to just check the pulse. It sounds to me like people are sort of comfortable with the results of the level 2 screening and the ones that we've screened out. Marty, you mentioned maybe a little bit of interest in seeing something similar to remote holding, but more of a remote toll booth. Is there anybody who is, you can chat or raise your hand, anybody who's uncomfortable with this or confused or not ready to move on with these two alternatives that are on the screen? Judy, did you have a comment about that?
I just want to clarify, maybe I'm forgetting, have you folks spoken to the lengthening of the dock and what that does in terms of sail? I'm wondering if the farther out the boat docks in that cove, is it taking more wind, taking more wave action? Is that an issue?
I think Doug can speak to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug. Doug, are you there? Not. I could try to answer it.
I'm back. Is that
Okay.
Sorry about that. I thought I took care of that mute button. Judy, it's a really good point. And we will, as part of the analysis that we're going to do, we will be talking to the ferry boat captains. They're kind of the best people to talk to. You know, they've got decades of experience right there. And we have noticed that on other terminals, the further out you go, you could get out beyond a point and there could be more sail areas. So we will look into it and we will make sure it's safe before we finalize any design.
Well, Laura, it sounds like from what aren't any other questions, I'm feeling like the group seems pretty comfortable with this as a wrapping up level 2 screening.
Yeah, Susan, I see your comment in here. Mentioned in the community engagement summary about adding the water taxi dock Fauntleroy in addition to car passenger terminal. Is that something that might be investigated as part of this project? Dave, do you want to respond to Susan's comment or question?
Sorry, I was reading Richard's comment. So and then I saw David McDaniel had his hand up.
I'll just shout out, it was just in the community engagement summary, there was some comments about adding a water taxi slip for one of the smaller just passenger water taxi boats, like the King County water taxi, or I forget what the other one they mentioned, Kitsap or something. So I just didn't know if with these two that are going forward, if that option is something that might be considered.
Well, it's not in the current plan. I think that's partly because, I mean, we don't even have a second slip in the current plan. In part because the travel and destination studies that have been done show that folks are trying to get downtown, and we already have a shortage of a single occupant, or excuse me, pedestrians using the facility when they can take the alternates downtown from Southworth and Vashon. So it's not part of the current plan.
Dave, looks like Richard was finally able to get through to us. So just wanted to note this question here about, or just a comment about Southworth people not being able to get to the dock. They start refilling the Vashon lanes, which moves up the line, but the toll booth delays. So Southworth folks to get on the dock and the boat. And I've missed many sailings to do this. Whatever the end solution is, I think the toll booths have to go for a reasonable, inclusive alternative.
Thanks for that, Richard. And as I noted in the community engagement results, we noticed there's sort of fewer comments coming from Southworth ferry riders and South Kitsap residents. So that's really helpful to hear a perspective of a Southworth rider. I know you're a regular rider, and we're going to want to chat with you and others on how to kind of bring that more into the conversation.
Thanks, Hadley. David, I see your hand is up. David, it looks like you're speaking, but we're not able to hear you. Scott will also be reaching out to you, David, to see if he can help you out. Having a few technology issues this evening. So a while back, it looks like, John, you had a question here about RCWs for advanced ticketing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that question. And I think Charlie's going to answer that when he reviews the good to go scope of work.
Yeah, well, I could just answer just to your first question. There are WACs, Washington Administrative Code, that would need to be changed to require advanced ticketing. Right, there's a priority loading WAC that sort of gives priority to certain categories of riders, and it was one that we had to change when we implemented vehicle reservations for the San Juan Islands and Port Townsend Coupeville route, to say that somebody who had a vehicle reservation could get priority over somebody else who didn't, and that would probably apply to this. So there's some that would need to be looked at, John, or adjusted if we move forward with a new policy. And that's one of the reasons that it was sort of identified as something that needs to be studied or considered, because there were some policy changes required.
Kathleen. Looks like Scott's curious about a second slip and noting that ferries are waiting in the sound when they could be docking while the other ferry is loading. Dave, can you talk about a second slip?
Yeah, I sure can. It's not currently in the plan. We do have plans for a second slip at Southworth. And there's other terminals where we've looked at this, but it's not currently in the plan. I actually was up in the wheelhouse a week or so ago, and I was just talking to the captains about what kind of improvements they'd like to see. And that was one of the first things the gentleman suggested to me, because they thought it would improve on-time performance, having the ability to not have to wait and, for that single parking stall, if you will, would really improve the dwell time. And again, having a second slip could work, but again, you still have the constraints on the dock with an 80 car slip. So it's not in the cards at the moment. I think that whatever we do out there, we should always be mindful that at some point a second slip could be added. Maybe not in my lifetime, but at some point. And so I think whatever we build, we don't want to, preclude that option, but it's not part of this. It's not part of this project, and I don't think it's viewed as significant enough to add a huge operational advantage. That there are other solutions that we'd like to explore before that.
Thanks, Dave. It looks like David was able to get his question into the chat here. So he's curious about how far into Fauntleroy Cove does the existing dock extend? And how far will the 124 car dock extend? And same question for 186 car dock. I know that someone from our team likely has those figures available. So just pause to see if anyone from the project team would like to chime in.
Maybe we could start with the second part of the question, Doug, on looking at how far the 124 and 186, unless you know off the top of your hand the existing length. I know I emailed it to Marty because she asked the same question this morning and I need to find my email.
I do have that email open. So the existing trestle is 558 feet in length with an additional 105 feet for the transfer span with apron.
Yeah, so the 124 option that you see there would be another 220 feet beyond the 550. So, and then for the 186, the 186 is not designed yet, so it's going to be, I don't think it'll be beyond the 124, but it'll be out in that range, because we're gonna have to, it'll be a combination of lengthening and a little bit of selective widening out towards the end. So there'll be a little bit of widening, but the widening would not be in the Cove Park or the nearshore area. It would be in the deeper water. So anyway, I think when we come back to you in the next meeting or two, we will have a refined version of what that 186 car dock would look like.
And Doug, you're also looking at if there's something in between 124 to 186 in that range, right? That's the idea of that number 2 there.
Yes. So there's a lot of things to consider. There's the nearshore environment, there's the water depth, there's all the different needs of the ferry system. We'd like to have a lane for HOVs. We'd like to have some priority loading. We'd like to have motorcycles. There's a lot of operational needs that will kind of drive how wide the dock is, and we kind of want to strive to something that is the best for everyone. So the exact dimension is coming, but we don't have it right now.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for bringing that question in, David. Looks like another question here for Frank about seeing the boat waiting in the water in the afternoon often. Is a schedule revision or an updated planned at some point in this project? So scheduling something that we'll be considering.
Frank, it's not specifically planned because, as you know, we just did a major overhaul of the sailing schedule that started in spring 2019. We haven't, with the pandemic and everything, we haven't even had a chance to sort of see how that schedule works with full traffic levels and 3-boat ferry service for much, extended time. But we committed at the time of that new sailing schedule revision that if in the future we needed to revise it or tweak it or something, we would, especially with a project like this. If the operations changed dramatically, we would need to kind of take another look at the sailing schedule.
Probably. Gregory?
Well, again, I'm gonna make an observation and follow up to Frank, but some of the challenge that I see with the boats waiting is the new fast ferry at Southworth Terminal has created a wait, which then creates a ripple effect when you get back to the Fauntleroy side. So we often sit off dock at Southworth waiting for the fast ferry to leave. So it's just kind of a coordination thing between Kitsap and WSF on how we coordinate that route just a little bit different, because that's what I see as causing some of those backup delays.
Thank you for adding that, Gregory. Just note that John also has some concerns about the 2-boat schedule. Looks like we're also hearing from Devin. What is a potential signalization of the intersection at the end of the dock included in any of the alternatives as well? It's potential to lead to more efficient loading. Mark, is that something you want to respond to, or maybe Dave?
Well, I'll go first. I think it's always been part of our idea here to improve operations was to address the safety concerns and the queuing and look at that. It's something that we've talked with SDOT about a lot, and the opportunity here exists to, as part of this project, to do something about that intersection. So we don't have any preconceived ideas of how that would work, other than we think it's an operational improvement to signalize that and improve that flow off the dock, so that you don't have the backups onto the boat. But the details again that's part of our future efforts. Anything to add, Mark?
The only thing I would add, Dave, is that obviously two things I would add. One, as people have observed, there are different ways to do I'll call it a signalized treatment of an intersection like that when you have peaky operations. So just be aware that we would be factoring that in. It doesn't have to be what I will call a traditional traffic signal. There's different types of approaches to that. And then I would say the other thing we'll be, of course, factoring is it will potentially interplay with how good to go, advanced ticketing, toll booth configurations under the two different alternatives is thought about. In terms of an approach and the types of systems that might be in play. So it's early on, but those would be things that to just kind of note that would be considerations.
Thanks, Mark. So I think we're ready to move on. There's some interest here in talking about the Good to Go study that's about to get started.
Yes, I know there's a lot of interest, and Angus, I saw your comment about saving time, and others have mentioned it, and I don't want to we built this up through the meeting, and today we're not sharing results or anything. As Dave mentioned at the beginning, this Good to Go study is just getting started. The scope of work and the contract with the consultant was just finished, and they're going to begin this Good to Go study this month, and it'll go for about 7 months. So Charlie's going to talk a little bit more right now about what's in the scope of work for the Good to Go study, so what they'll be studying, and then we know this is a topic that many of you are interested in, as evidenced by the conversation tonight, which will be really helpful to them as they get going. We know you have lots of questions that we will not be able to answer today because they haven't even really started, but we'll welcome your questions at a future meeting, and we'll be engaging you and the other advisory groups as we go through this Good to Go study and dig into the details more. So with that, kind of teeing that up, I'll hand it off to Charlie to go over what is in the scope of work, so what the consultant will be studying. But before I do that, just letting you know that in addition to the Good to Go study, we'll also be talking to you about more about these two alternatives and wrapping up the Pell process. So our plan is to have meetings in October and another one before the end of the year, sometime in amongst the holiday season there, maybe early December. And we'll be getting those dates out to you pretty quickly, but the idea is to have about 2 more meetings in 2022 to tackle these topics. So Charlie?
Okay, thanks, Hadley. As Hadley said, we will be sharing more about this in our next 2 meetings, the Good to Go and Advanced Ticketing Study. But here is what you can expect from the study and subsequent white paper, which documents the study results. So the goal of the study is to determine feasible solutions for implementing Good to Go and Advanced Ticketing System at the Fauntleroy Terminal, with an eye toward replicating it at other terminals as well. As part of that, we will identify policy changes needed to support Good to Go implementation. And all of that will help us determine the viability of maintaining the current dock size at Fauntleroy, which will be critical for the environmental analysis. We expect the study to be completed in the spring of next year, and we'll share our draft findings with you ahead of that date. With that, we can take any questions.
Thanks, Charlie. Gregory, I see your hand is up. I think it may be up from earlier. Did you have another question or comment?
Nope. Kind of went.
Oh, sorry about that.
All right. And then Helen did have a question in the chat, Charlie, around it. Does advanced ticketing have to exclude the option of the ticket booth? And she goes on to talk about the electronic ticketed vehicles could simply go through the reader and then head over to a reserve spot without delaying southward through Vashon bound vehicles, and to selectively load for single destination sailings and a booth for those who might need it. Is that something that we might be looking at?
We could we'll certainly share that comment with the those putting the study together for us.
Fletcher.
Oh, I just add that one of the complexities of the Good to Go seems like it's having multiple people in the car, but if kids, like everyone under 18 is now free, like that might simplify it a little bit.
I'm expecting something a little complicated, but whatever we come up with, we're going to share with all of you, and I hope you help us put a good quality final study together.
And thanks for that reminder, Fletcher. That is a big change coming up starting October 1st. All riders under the age of 19 will travel free.
Thanks, Fletcher. Marty.
Yes, just a question. If members of the public or anyone on the CAG have thoughts after this meeting tonight is over, do we still just send them via Fauntleroy Term Project, and then do they make it to the Good to Go group or the study group?
Yes, absolutely. We'll continue sending out that log to the project team, including the folks working on the Good to Go advanced ticket study.
Yeah, and we should clarify that the Good to Go study is being done by Jacobs, which is the company that Doug and Mark work for, and they're going to be involved. And then they're bringing in other resources that are experts in this sort of thing. So it's all part of the team that already knows the project quite well and is involved in these meetings. And then there'll be other folks you'll start to see too.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for clarifying that, Hadley. Frank.
Did I hear correctly that the Good to Go study will be only on the Fauntleroy dock or the Triangle route, not anywhere else in the system?
Yeah, Charlie, do you want to clarify that?
It's starting out at Fauntleroy. That'll be part one, the first terminal we'll look at. And then from there, we hope it gets legs and continues on throughout the system.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Pausing to see if there's any final questions or comments before we wrap up this evening. Okay, I think with that, Haley, we can shift to the next slide. So really that wraps up the end of our presentation. Really appreciate everyone joining again this evening, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any more questions, comments as you digest these conversations. We look forward to hearing from all of you, and we'll stay on, those of us from the project team, a few minutes longer, just in case anyone else has any final thoughts.
Thank you all so much for spending your evening with us, and to all of you members of the community and the audience too for listening in, and definitely email us if you have thoughts or comments after this meeting.
I just have a quick question. Will we be meeting again between now and once the study is completed?
Yes,
Yeah.
we'll be meeting several times, and we'll be hearing updates on the study as we go. As I mentioned, our goal is to meet in October and then again before the end of the year to talk about the Good to Go study, but also the alternatives in more detail and the rest of the planning process. And then the study isn't due to be completed until next spring.
Thank you.
So there'll be many chances to weigh in along the way. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.